Going into our 10th lecture in this module, we're going to talk about homeostasis, in particular the excretory system and the skin. Let's start with the former, the excretory system, which is comprised of the kidneys, the ureters, and the bladder. The primary functions of the excretory system are regulation, in particular of blood pressure, blood osmolarity, acid-base balance, and the removal of nitrogenous wastes from the body. The primary organ of the excretory system is the kidney, which is what we're going to go into next. The kidney produces urine and filters out wastes. It does so via a portal system. Blood from the renal artery flows into the glomeruli through the afferent arterioles and leaves through the efferent arterioles. The remaining filtrate then goes through the kidney, particularly through the nephrons, and passes through and goes to the bladder. There are different processes that the excretory system goes through. 3 in particular are what we're going to discuss today. Filtration is the movement of solutes from blood to filtrate in the Bowman's capsule. This is where the glomerulus is located. Secretion is the movement of solutes from blood to filtrate anywhere but the Bowman's capsule. And reabsorption is in the opposite direction when solutes move from filtrate to blood. The excretory system participates in all 3 of these functions. Let's go into the functional unit of the kidney, the nephron. There's 4 components that we're going to talk about. The proximal convoluted tubule is the site of bulk reabsorption. This is where most of the glucose, amino acids, vitamins, salt, and water are taken back in. If you remember what reabsorption is, it's when solutes go from the filtrate to the blood. This is also where H+ ions, K ions, ammonia, and urea are secreted. The next part of the nephron is the loop of Henle. This is permeable to water but not salt, and as it goes down, it gets more and more salty. It reabsorbs the majority of water using this osmotic gradient. You can think of this as a roller coaster along a salt gradient. In the next slide, we're going to look at a picture that goes over these components, so don't worry if you can't conceptualize this in your head. The distal convoluted tubule is where aldosterone is going to target. This is where salt is reabsorbed and waste products are excreted. And lastly, the collecting duct responds to both aldosterone and ADH. This permeability allows for water reabsorption. As promised, here's a picture of the nephron. Starting first, we've got this top component, which is the Bowman's capsule, listed here. This is where afferent and efferent arterioles pass through and bring with it the blood that needs to be filtered. As it travels through, you've got the proximal tubule. This is where most of the solutes are reabsorbed. The loop of Henle is listed below. As you travel down, it gets more salty. So this is the least salty area. And at the very bottom is where it's most salty. So by osmosis, as it travels down to where it's more salty, more water is going to come out. And as it travels up, more solutes are going to come out as the salinity decreases. Finally, when it reaches the distal tubule and the collecting duct, this is where ADH and aldosterone take part. This is where most of the water reabsorption occurs. And finally, once it gets down to around here in the collecting duct, it's slated for excretion. So it's going to travel down the ureters down to the bladder. Take note that the kidney is comprised of tons and tons of nephrons working simultaneously. It's not just one, but this is one of the functional units. There's various hormonal controls of the kidneys, but the 2 that are most important and the ones that you'll likely see tested on the MCAT are aldosterone and ADH. Take note that aldosterone does not change blood osmolarity, whereas ADH does. The reason for this is because aldosterone stimulates solute reabsorption, which then leads to an increase in water retention. This doesn't change the exact composition of blood, which is why blood osmolarity doesn't change. ADH, on the other hand, stimulates the increase in water reuptake instead of sodium reabsorption. Since water is taken in more, This increases blood volume and decreases the blood osmolarity. This distinction is going to be important when you're looking at questions and thinking about what hormones are necessary or functioning during a homeostatic balancing system. The bladder is quite simply an organ that stores urine for excretion. There's two sphincters that control this urine. Obviously, we don't just urinate all the time. We have the ability to control it. The external urethral sphincter is under voluntary control because it is controlled by skeletal muscles. The internal one, however, is under involuntary control, or the parasympathetic control. You'll notice that you can hold your urine for quite a while, but there's going to come a point where you can't. This is where the parasympathetic system takes control and removes this urine. Your body can't have too much urine in it. It's not good for its homeostatic balance. So that's going to be a rough overview of the excretory system. So let's go into the second portion, the skin, and how it pertains to our homeostatic balance. The functions of the skin are as follows. They act as a barrier to protect the body. It prevents dehydration, regulates temperature, and provides nerves for pressure and sensation. When you sweat, you're actually cooling your body. And when you shiver and constrict, that's when you're trying to retain heat. Another way that the skin protects your body is through melanocytes, which produce melanin to protect your skin against UV radiation. The darker your skin is, the more melanin your body produces, and the more resilient to sunlight you are. There are different layers of the skin, but we're not really going to go into too much detail on these because the MCAT doesn't really test them to a very extensive layer. The hypodermis is the innermost layer listed below. This is where most of your vasculature is going to be. Your fat cells, your sweat, and a decent amount of your pressure cells, such as Merkel cells and Meissner's corpuscles, along with Ruffinians. The dermis is the middle layer. This is where a lot of your hair follicles are situated. And lastly, the epidermis is the topmost layer. This is mostly dead skin though, but it is the first barrier that anything comes into contact with. It comes in contact with your body. We'll finish our discussion of homeostasis there. Homeostasis is a very delicate balance, and your body does its utmost to maintain a certain range of temperature and fluid balance. This kind of balancing mechanism is something that you're going to see on your test, so make sure you're familiar with it. Please join us in the next lecture as we go into the last system of the human body, the musculoskeletal system.